Well, it's the beginning of another month, and we're back at it. Elwood City Limits, the episodic Arthur podcast. Lucas, it might be hard to believe, but by the end of this episode, we'll be halfway done this season of Arthur.
It's amazing. We've really reached the kind of like HBO miniseries era of Arthur. It's almost, disingenuous to call them seasons.
Yeah. We were talking about this a little bit on the ECL patron Discord about why the seasons are like this and why they're so much shorter. Keep in mind that as these are going on, and I think I've already said this, so not to repeat myself, but there are also hour-long Arthur specials that are going on at the same time. But you're right, it does feel strange that we are going from, at one point at the beginning of the show, Arthur was that first season I think is like close to 20 episodes or something, or maybe over 20 episodes. Then we went down to like 15, 12, then it was 10 for a while, and now it's 4 and 3, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it makes our job easy, but we definitely, if it's 4 and 3, like, we can't be doing a top 5 episodes. We talked about this before. For seasons that are under 5 episodes, it's like we got to do best episode of the season or top 3 when they're a little bit longer.
Yeah, I do think I'm leaving the door open for top 3, and so the pressure is on with these shorter seasons. Is that these episodes they gotta be bangers, or else, maybe there will just be one worthy episode per season. We don't know yet. We've still got plenty of this to go through. And we're going to talk about another episode in this season that we're in just a few minutes here. But first of all, we got a couple things. Emails in just a moment. I do want to mention that I had a wonderful encounter with some ECL listeners recently, and I want to personally thank KDP and Joe for visiting me all the way from Iowa, and on Lucas's behalf as well for the gifts that you brought us from Iowa. Lucas, I'll be dropping those off to you very soon.
I can't wait.
And really, it's so nice to have something from that part of the States, and it's so nice that, the word still travels about Elwood City Limits and about Arthur, and we have some pretty darn nice listeners who are usually very, very kind and generous with their time and with their money as well, especially our patrons, but all of our listeners are cherished by us. So we want to say thank you for stopping by Halifax. They were inspired to come here from Iowa all the way to Halifax because of all of the free tourism that we're doing for the place that we live, Lucas, that we've been talking about Nova Scotia for 8 years. And then finally, and this is true, they were like, we're going to go international. Let's go to Halifax. We sold them.
Well, it's funny that you say that, Will, because we're about to enter into August.
Yeah.
And as we enter into August, and this might be the last year we ever do this, looking at the upcoming schedule for Elwood City Limits, we'll be finished by Arthur this time next year. The Best of Halifax Awards. Don't forget, Will, this is forever a Halifax podcast. If Arthur is the A subject, Halifax is the B subject. And we are proudly a Halifax podcast through and through. And so with the upcoming Coast Best of Halifax Awards, this might be our last ever chance. So keep us in mind, folks. If the podcast has inspired you to be curious about Halifax, Nova Scotia, we might need your help in voting for us later on in the month.
We will keep you informed of when it is Best of Halifax time, as we always do. Don't worry. All right, now over to elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. We've got a few emails today, so let's get into it. First off, from Ashley Hollingsworth. Hey, Will and Lucas. I'm all caught up with season 21, and it's been interesting. Though I can't say this has been my favorite season, I'm happy we still got some good Arthur stories this late into the show, like Arthur Takes a Stand and Slink's special talent. While the season definitely did not end on a good note, I was overjoyed to hear this is the last time we will see dog and baby episodes. After making it through that saga, my final thoughts are that I still don't like it. It's similar to Rugrats All Grown Up. It was cute for an episode, but past that, it gets old and boring. I'm happy they're over and done with. At least we struggled through it together. That is true. Going into season 22, I'm hoping we get more stories about the other tough customers, surprise appearances from forgotten characters, and bizarre celebrity cameos. Speaking of which, who's a celebrity or famous figure you wished appeared on Arthur? Mine is Dave Grohl. I have a headcanon that he would join the school as the new music teacher. He'd be a tiger named Dave Growl. I've probably thought way too much about this, but I think it would be a fun cameo. Lucas, celebrities that maybe we missed out on for Arthur?
I'm trying to think of something. The trick to a great Arthur celebrity cameo is that they're not too famous.
Right?
Yeah. Who was the architect?
Oh, Frank Gehry?
Frank Gehry, the likes of Frank Gehry. I mean, my favorite of all time is, of course, Art Garfunkel. And I don't think that would have hit the same if it was Paul Simon who was on Arthur. It's like all the more special that it's Art Garfunkel. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm trying to think. You know what? And now I'm going to go against what I just said. Jackie Chan probably is who I would have liked to see on Arthur. He's got an established kind of cartoon version of himself, and I feel like he would be a fun presence on the show.
Ditto for Weird Al. Have Weird Al come in and have an episode with Buster.
Yeah, that would be a good one. MF Doom, I think MF Doom you could picture it already, Will.
The perpetrator.
Make him a bear or something. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, are you kidding me? There's so many rappers that I would have loved to see. But unfortunately, the first rapper that came to my mind was Lin-Manuel Miranda, and honestly, I think we dodged a bullet on that one. No hate to him. It's just like I don't know if I would have liked to personally see that. But yeah.
Did you hear that he's making an album out of the Warriors?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
I don't know about all that. I don't know.
I don't know about all that. Yeah.
I would say, oh my goodness, I had a good one and it just escaped. British journalist Louis Theroux.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think he would be fun. You make him a rabbit, have him show up to Elwood City, ask some questions, ask the real kind of deep questions. People of that tenure, right? Like, I know the listener probably wants us to say something like The Rock, but I think the more kind of specialized the celebrity is, the better it works.
I personally, if there was going to be a wrestler on the show, I would have liked it to be John Cena. I think that would have been, I think John Cena would have been a little bit more appropriate for the age they're going for. But, I mean, there's so many wrestlers and rappers and artists that we would have loved to have seen on the show. Maybe a couple will make their way in for the Arthur movie. Maybe former President Barack Obama will be in the Arthur movie. I don't know.
Anthony Bourdain.
Well, yes. Yeah. I thought you were saying Anthony Bourdain in the upcoming Arthur movie. But yeah, when he was...
No.
Yeah, when he was still alive. Absolutely. Ashley continues here. As for my thoughts on the gay rat wedding, the episode made me hop back into new Arthur. I stopped keeping up with the series around season 18 or so, and though I had plans to catch up, I never did. But when I heard about the gay rat wedding, I knew I had to watch it, and I'm so glad I did. I love how they portrayed gay relationships, and most of all, I loved how they didn't care who Mr. Ratburn married. The conversation wasn't about the kids being shocked that he was marrying a man. They just wanted his partner to be someone nice and caring. I really applaud Arthur for taking a stand and showing that kids are intelligent enough to grasp these concepts. Plus, it normalizes gay marriage for a young audience, especially those who have gay people in their families. Maybe some viewers are raised in gay households, and considering that gay representation got Postcards from Buster canceled, it's great that PBS didn't turn tail and run. Instead, they took a stand and became part of the conversation. It's a positive portrayal that doesn't focus on Mr. Ratburn being gay. Instead, it's about the kids wanting what's best for their teacher. Happy to see season 22 is starting off strong at TTFN. Thank you, Ashley. Our next one comes in from Yoshi. Dear Will and Lucas, I hope you are both well and keeping cool. We are certainly trying in this humidity. I wanted to say hi and offer a possible theory for how Mr. Ratburn and Patrick, no last name, may have been able to keep wedding costs down. If most of their guests were kids, would that mean they could spend a lot less on alcohol? Does alcohol even exist in the Arthur universe? Well, that's a good... and Mr. Ratburn, I don't know. He doesn't seem like the type of person to tie one on, at least with alcohol. Maybe he's more like a weed man, or maybe wine, you know?
Yeah, a fine scotch in his study, if anything.
Sure, yeah.
Patrick, on the other hand, listen, that's an Irish name. You know he can throw him back.
As for teachers...
He's having chocolate, he's having chocolate hot toddies at his friggin' was it a candy store? What was the store he worked at? I already forget.
It was his chocolate store.
Yeah, it was like a chocolatier kind of store. Yeah, he's making some sort of chocolate cocktail.
Or like putting bourbon in some chocolate.
Yeah, and he's getting blasted all day long.
As for teachers sharing their personal lives, I teach high school, and I am always surprised by how much my students ask questions and show interest in us. For the most part, I maintain a boundary about what I share with my students, but I do find that knowing a little bit about each other can create a more comfortable environment, which I admit is probably more of a high school thing than a younger kid thing. Maybe it's because at age 31, I'm one of the younger staff members, but I have more students asking me about myself than I ever felt comfortable doing with my own teachers, who were older than that. Like you both, looking back at the Word From Us Kids segments and seeing that the teachers are my age or younger is definitely weird. I'm also excited to hear you talk about the upcoming episode When Rivals Came to Roost, which has some language that reminds me of a certain U.S. political figure who wanted to build a wall. Not sure if it was purposeful, but given the episode's message, it wouldn't surprise me. Anyway, I really enjoyed your coverage of Special Someone. As an openly queer teacher at my school, seeing my favorite fictional teacher get his gay rat wedding has always meant a lot to me. Sending you both good thoughts for a fun rest of the summer. Eating kale and sharpening pencils. That's from Yoshi. Next one is from Melissa Jeffries. Hi, Will and Lucas. I'd like to start off by saying I love the show and listening to you guys comment on one of my favorite childhood shows. Something about it brings me so much joy and helps me get through my day, so thank you for that. I'm in the middle of listening to episode 119 with Buster's Green Thumb. Lucas wasn't on this one. It's guest host Andrew Power, one of our patrons. And hey, check out Andrew Power's webcomics as well. You and Andrew were talking about how weird it is to eat raw tomatoes. I'd like to comment that it's actually really common in the southern states of the U.S. For reference, my grandpa had a garden, and when he would go tend his garden, he'd take a salt shaker with him and pick ripe tomatoes and eat them with a little salt sprinkled on. They're actually really refreshing, especially during the summertime. Just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Thanks again for producing this great podcast. Okay.
You could tell I was not on that episode, Will, because I be putting away those raw tomatoes.
Yeah.
I'm a when they were talking about Tomato Girl Summer, I was a big proponent.
Who's they? What do you mean they?
Last summer it was Tomato Girl Summer. You're late to the menu. I know it's Brat Summer this year, but you're late to the memo, Will. Your TikTok algo was not keeping you up on the trends.
No.
Anyway, I eat a raw tomato. I'll eat a raw tomato like an apple. I don't even need the salt.
Okay. I mean, I like cherry tomatoes. Those are nice and small, and I'm not opposed, but it's just like I don't think of, and I mean tomatoes are a fruit, but it's just funny to think of it in the same class as, like, you take an apple off the branch and you eat it. Take a tomato off the branch and eat it. I'd be like, I don't know. I feel like this should be paired with something. So maybe that's me. Obviously didn't grow up in the southern United States, so that experience is not familiar to me. Our last email here is from Caleb Cote. Hey guys, this is Caleb from the Henson History Podcast. Arthur was my favorite show growing up, so much so that I dressed up as Arthur for Halloween, had an Arthur birthday party, or at least an Arthur piñata. Cool. Anyways, I'm emailing you guys to warn you that most of season 22 of Arthur and seasons 23 and 24 aren't great. A little editorial here. Caleb goes on to describe several episodes that are coming up, which I'm just going to omit so as not to spoil us. But Caleb's message here is to not get our hopes up about the coming seasons. Apparently, they're not very good. And I thought that was really funny when I read it. Anyways, few questions. Did you ever have a feud between you and a friend? Feud? I mean, I've had disagreements with friends. I've had arguments. There have been times where, like, it would be awkward. We wouldn't be speaking to each other. Generally, we make up, though. I can't think of something that caused a lasting rift or anything, at least off the top of my head, or that I'd be willing to share.
No, I feel like a feud implies scheming.
Yeah.
Preying on one's downfall. And I've certainly never done that. I probably wouldn't consider them. I'm a big proponent, Will, of live and let live.
Yeah.
If I harbor ill will to the point that I'm feuding, I'm probably just gonna disengaged from the situation. That's not a fun answer.
No.
That's the real answer. There is something romantic, though, about a feud. They say the line between love and hate is razor thin, so it'd be interesting to have kind of like a spy versus spy sort of rivalry with someone, really trying to prey on their downfall, try to orchestrate ill fortune, but I've never participated in something like that, I can't say.
I've been watching Metal Gear Scanlan, so I know very well that there is a thin line between love and hate in a feud. There's a lot of that going on in those games. What is one thing you couldn't live without as a kid? So for me, I'd say probably my teddy bears. They're still in my apartment right now. I'm pointing like you can see me, but they're in my closet. I have 2 teddy bears and a blanket that I've had since I was a baby. Couldn't live without them as a kid. I had a bunch of stuffed animals.
I would say the personal computer in my parents' kitchen.
Ooh. Now, I mean, you certainly grew up. We've spoken about before how you grew up with the internet and all this kind of thing. Were there like a collection, any games that were go-tos for you as a kid? PC games?
Yeah, I would use Miniclip all the time.
Oh, yeah.
So, Heli Attack 2, stuff like that.
I loved Heli Attack 2.
Even Heli Attack 3 eventually.
Oh.
Adventure Quest. My little sister was big on Club Penguin.
Okay.
But I also, I just liked looking at videos on IGN and reading the GameFAQs forums and
doing character battle. Did you take part in character battle?
I did not take part in character battle. I remember checking the Smash Brothers website back when they were promoting Smash Brothers Brawl. Checking that every day and reporting back to the elementary school playground for what I saw. Homestar Runner.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big one, yeah.
And not related to Arthur, but what are your histories with the Nicktoon Hey Arnold? Really briefly, I watched Hey Arnold when I was younger off and on. I think I was always struck when I was a kid of what a nice guy Arnold was and how the stories were. It's almost like a more down-to-earth sitcom, adult sitcom for kids. And I ended up actually quite enjoying what I watched of it, even though on its face it was just like, well, this is just a cartoon about a kid. That it seemed like something I wouldn't care about, but it charmed its way into my life. I did enjoy Hey Arnold. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but I did like it.
I remember that I didn't see a lot of episodes of Hey Arnold. Like, there's a couple ones that really stick out strongly in my head, like the eating contest one, or of course I think Emmy at least nominated or even winning Christmas one about the war in Vietnam.
Oh yeah.
And I think was there a Hey Arnold movie? I think I saw the movie.
Yeah, there were. I think there were 2. There was one that came out in theaters, in the early 2000s, and then there was one that's a bit more recent that was like a continuation of the story about Arnold's parents, if I'm not mistaken.
But it was definitely like, it must have been on a weird time on Canadian TV.
Yeah.
I feel like I would see it sometimes, and of course I would see that Vietnam episode because it would always play during Christmas.
Yeah.
But I feel like it wasn't on all the time. And it might have also been a bit before my time. Like, I really haven't seen a lot of Doug.
Oh, sure. Man.
And that's because I'm too young for it.
Yeah.
Like, Doug was really the generation before me.
Oh, yeah. I saw a ton of Doug. A lot of Doug.
So there you go. I think Hey Arnold was like that, where I might have actually been maybe just a little young for it.
Okay.
I will say, though, that Helga was my introduction to the tsundere character archetype. That was definitely the first. I was like, why is she so mean? Even though she loves him, and now I know all too well
how I hate him. And yet I love him. I think I recently rewatched the Romeo and Juliet episode, which is really, really good. There's some Hey Arnold episodes I have very fond memories of. And for anybody else who really enjoys Hey Arnold, there's a podcast that have been very nice to us on Instagram. Podcast 118, a Hey Arnold re-education. I think they're on hiatus right now, but they have some back episodes. So again, Podcast 118. Check that out if you want to have a similar, like, in format to what we're doing, but for Hey Arnold. All right, thank you everybody who sent us emails in. Those were awesome. Really enjoyed talking about those topics. And we also really enjoyed talking about the latest Patreon podcast. Our latest episode of For the Kids is all about Bear and the Big Blue House. And we had a fun old time learning more about that and talking about a full episode. It was a very, very calming, very relaxing watch, I think. So you can get that if you are one of our patrons. Don't forget to listen to that whenever you want. If you're not a patron, patreon.com/Elwood City Limits for extra podcasts, the Discord, and of course a shout out, as I'm going to do right now. We want to thank people like Caitlin Harrington Robinson, Muppet Baby Cat, Matt, and Andrew Power. We want to thank Bob Yee and Sydney Long. We want to thank Derek Richopo and KDP. Thank you to Nehemiah Unimuk and Mamada. Thank you to Emma Graybeal and Jared G. Thank you to Rowan S., KPX_1, and Dear Miss Elizabeth, a.k.a. Z. We will have another Patreon episode of our series ECL Origins, and I'm going to let you know about what that's going to be at the end of this episode. But right now, let's get into this. Season 22, this will bring us to the halfway point when Rivals Came to Roost. And Lucas, we're at the point in Arthur where we have been making use of Arthur lore. We've been using every part of the buffalo, so to speak. And this time, this episode is couched in the rivalry between Lakewood Elementary and Mighty Mountain. Mighty Mountain, who have been here since the first season of the show.
It's a little bit of art imitating life. It's apt that we're kind of watching this episode this week because the Olympics are going on right now.
That's right.
And so kind of athletic rivalry is just one aspect of the rivalry with Mighty Mountain, but there is this kind of spirit of competition, if you will, in the air. And so I was like, oh, okay, it's good that we're talking about this episode this week.
We've got Brain giving us a summation of the rivalry. They've been rivals ever since Vippington, who looks to be a child of the 50s, perhaps. He's got like that pompadour going on, defeated Lakewood Elementary in a hula hoop contest. And then they've been rivals, trading victories back and forth. And one of their most hotly contested, if not the most hotly contested competition, is the science fair. And Lakewood vows to beat their rivals, Mighty Mountain, once again. But this is thrown for a bit of a loop. Early in this episode here, we see that the Lakewood kids have an exhibit going on for the science fair that has to do with worms. Buster is very attached to these worms. He has a line here about how, I guess not everybody gets worm humor, because he's really ingratiating himself to the ways of the worm, so to speak.
Yeah, the Buster's kind of like B-plot for this episode is he's obsessed with this worm called Mr. Wiggles.
Mr. Wiggles, yeah.
And there's this kind of fun push and pull between Buster and the Brain, and that the Brain, has all these worm facts based, of course, off of his scientific research. I'm sure he's reading peer-reviewed papers on the subject. And instead, Buster has watched an episode of Bionic Bunny, and that's where he's kind of gleaning all of his factoids about worms from.
That's right, and we'll find out a bit more about that in a bit here. This is thrown for a bit of a loop, though, because Mr. Ratburn says that Mighty Mountain has had a burst pipe in the school. So some of the Mighty Mountain students are going to be sharing classes with Lakewood, including Mr. Ratburn's class, which everybody seems to be okay with at first. In fact, Muffy goes so far as to propose to make them welcome kits, which I thought was a very nice move from her. But Brain is the one who isn't keen to get too friendly with them. He wants to stoke these fires of competition. In fact, when Mr. Ratburn announces this, Brain says, "But they'll see our worms, our top secret worms."
Yeah, you could play a drinking game with this one every time they mention worms. This is a worm-heavy episode.
Yeah, and it feels like Worms was kind of a, first few seasons. You get a lot more worm mentioned. Back when gross-out humor was a little bit more open season for kids' shows. More worm talk in this one than you'd expect. So with these welcome kits that Muffy's talking about, they offer various things. Buster offers up, he takes this out of his backpack, ketchup-flavored jelly beans, but then he says later that they might be jelly beans that he got ketchup on. He's not sure. And they create these ribbons that are the classic ribbon lapel sort of situation. So pink for breast cancer, all that kind of stuff. But these ones are red and yellow. And I said, that's strange. I wonder, it's red and yellow seems like something that would be used already because there's a lot of different color schemes for different causes. So I looked up red and yellow ribbons, and I'm going to give them the out on this one because they couldn't have known this. Yellow and red ribbons in real life mean protecting against COVID-19, getting your vaccine.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You know, you've heard about The Simpsons predicting the future. Maybe Arthur was trying to tell us something.
Maybe. So they were a little bit early for that, so I'm gonna give them a pass there. So the Mighty Mountain kids come to the school, and there's a couple of kids in the Mighty Mountain who we have been introduced to before. One of them is, now Lucas, did you remember Los Dedos?
No.
So that's the brain equivalent in the Mighty Mountain group who gets the most speaking lines. Los Dedos, we saw her all the way back in season 16. She was Brain's rival from the episode Brain's Chess Mess.
Oh my goodness, that was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, this episode still works too if you don't remember that, which is the mark of a good Easter egg, is that for the uninitiated it still works. But I thought they did a good job of reintroducing her as Brain's kind of counterpart and rival.
Yeah, chalk that up to the characters that I thought we would never, ever, ever see again, and we get another one a bit later. So the Lakewood kids end up having to redo their exhibit. While they're out of the room, Los Dedos accidentally spills soda onto it's like not an ant farm, but like it's a worm farm. I say ant because Mighty Mountain's exhibit is ant-based. It's ants in a jar. They are very suspicious about this. It seems that maybe it was sabotage from the inside, and in various other ways, the Mighty Mountain kids begin to chafe against the Lakewood kids, and the Lakewood kids, who were very friendly and welcoming at first, begin to sort of resent them a little bit. Like maybe they're taking advantage of how nice they're being. For example, in the lunch line, they're excited for pizza day, but the Mighty Mountain kids get pizza, and so Mrs. McGrady has to serve the Lakewood kids pasta a la yum, which is leftover spaghetti. She said, I had to turn yesterday's spaghetti into pasta a la yum. So implying that she added something to it, but it just looked like old spaghetti.
Yeah, this is kind of a weird... It feels like there's a joke missing or something. I thought there was like going to be some gross thing she combined with the spaghetti, like liverwurst or something, to make it pasta a la yum. So maybe we're missing something, but I was confused by this part too. This moment here, you know, where the kids are kind of growing to resent the fact that the Mighty Mountain kids are getting special treatment, despite, you know, the Mighty Mountain kids' situation being worse because, you know, they'd rather just be in their own school.
Right.
Keep this in mind when we talk about this episode in retrospect, because I think it's an interesting through line kind of throughout the episode.
Okay. I'm interested to hear what you mean by that. This is where, as you mentioned earlier, Lucas, Buster talks about how ants and worms are mortal enemies. And this is not based in science. In fact, Brain says, I don't think that's right. As they are recreating their worm exhibit, Buster is explaining a Bionic Bunny comic that he read, which involves the characters Dr. Antic and Squirm, which I believe are both villains, but essentially Dr. Antic, a giant ant, retires, and then Squirm which is a giant worm. It looks like, oh my god, there is a giant worm character that was the Tibbles' imaginary friend is that giant weird looking worm, and that's what it looks like. I'm gonna look that up in a second. Anyway, in this, Buster's describing the story about how Bionic Bunny has to like call Dr. Antic out of retirement in order to stop Squirm. There's a lot of ant puns, and Buster gets a lot of rhymes in there. So he says Bionic Bunny was trying to bribe Dr. Antic's aunt with old things. So he says, Auntie Worm bribed with antiques in her Antarctic antechamber. So if you're into that sort of thing, there's a lot of it there. But this is supposed to be like a backdrop of like the Lakewood kids are worms and the Mighty Mountain kids are ants, and they can never ever get along. I have a fact about this, but I'll bring it up later. Brain, Buster, and LaDonna the next day seemingly catch Los Dedos and Danny. Now, Lucas, do you remember Danny? We saw Danny recently.
No, it all starts to run together. These past 3 seasons, it's hard for a character to really stand out. So if Arthur's uncle was showing up, I'd be doing jumping jacks around my recording studio. But unfortunately, I don't remember Danny.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you one more chance here. Not that you're not in trouble or anything, but Danny was from the season we just finished, season 21.
No, he's immediately left my mind. Him, along with the rest of season 21, has immediately left my mind.
Okay, so Danny was in the episode Francine and the Soccer Spy. So he was Francine's friend that they made through soccer, and he was going to Mighty Mountain, and they were afraid that Francine was leaking the plays to Mighty Mountain.
Wow, another example of Arthur, predicting the future. For those of you not in Canada,
God, you're right!
We had our own kind of soccer spy scandal.
Oh my God, that's right. Lucas, I mean, for anybody who's not up on the Olympics or doesn't know about this, what's the soccer scandal that's going on right now?
Well, just the Canadian women's soccer team was caught using a drone to spy on, I think, Finland, or I'm not sure which country it was, but they were spying on another team, and they got a hefty, the coach had to step down, and they got a 6-point penalty for spying. So we had our own soccer spy.
I didn't even realize that as I was watching it or as I was talking about it here. I'm glad that you thought of that. So yeah, again, never expected to see Danny ever again. So, and I'm gonna say that again for both Los Dedos and Danny. I never expect to see them again, but you never know. Maybe we will. So, seemingly caught in the act of sabotaging their display, but it was seemingly an accident. They explained that it was just an accident. And from this, they put forth the proposal, Danny and Los Dedos, to put the worm exhibit is ruined to the point where they need to move it to something else. And so they propose putting the worms in the jar with the ants, which they're not sure is a great idea. And this just stokes Brain's paranoia even more. This leads to Muffy and Brain. They try to catch Danny and Los Dedos in the act of sabotaging, but they follow them back to Mighty Mountain, and they kind of peek into where they think they're going to be, and they see the water damage from the burst pipe in their classroom, and it affects them a little bit. They realize how much this really sucks for them, and how difficult it must be. It allows them a little bit of empathy. And in fact, they weren't going back to their old class to sabotage anything. They were looking for soft tongs so that they could move the worms into the ant habitat. And it's on this walk back that Brain re-examines his behavior a little bit, and they also get a good look at the ant. So they have the ants in a jar, the Mighty Mountain kids do, when we see them at Lakewood. But back at Mighty Mountain, they have this like triple ant enclosure that's like connected by pipes and stuff. It's quite sophisticated, and Brain is really impressed by their project and gives them an official apology. This is where Los Dedos actually reveals that her name is Isabella, and Los Dedos is just the name she uses at the chess competitions. So after this, the ants and the worms are combined into one project. Not just for survival, but Mighty Mountain and Lakewood agree to enter the science fair as a combined project, and they end up working really well together. And the ants and the worms distribute nutrients throughout the colony to each other, and that ends up winning both sides the science fair. And I did a little bit of research on this, and it's, you get different answers depending on which. But in some cases, in very rare cases, in fact, if you put ants and worms together, if the ants are aggressive, they may kill the worms in their habitat, but it all depends on species. Generally, ants and worms are fine together. So this...
Okay.
Yeah, this seems to be zoologically compatible.
Arthur continues to teach me.
I also just want to note here for anybody who was yelling at their podcast, Timmy and Tommy Tibble's imaginary friend is Uncle Wormy. So Uncle Wormy and Mr. Wiggles, two separate characters. Yes. And now, a word from us kids. Maya and her second grade class are, again, relating back to the episode we just saw, quite directly, in fact.
Yeah, you almost wonder, like, was this class one of the writer's kids' classes? Like, it's such a one-to-one. Because you think about, like, okay, how are they going to find a class in the Massachusetts, the New England area, where one class had an issue with the school's infrastructure and they had to attend another school's class? Like, I feel like there's no way that they were just able to secure that. The timeline doesn't match up. So I wonder if they filmed this before they were animating the episode, or what's going on, because it's a perfect one-to-one.
Yes, in fact, suspiciously perfect, perhaps, because in this Word From Us Kids segment, the second grade class is talking about a gas leak emergency that took place recently. It wasn't with another school, but it was for a certain neighborhood of, like you said, wherever this is being filmed, and how it displaced families in the neighborhood, including kids in the class, and how local efforts were able to help them out, how people came together within the neighborhood and helped each other out. This is literally taking the message of the previous episode and applying it to real life. So it's either quite lucky that that this happened, that they could take advantage of it and apply it to this episode, or, you know, I don't want to say about who may or may not have allegedly caused any kind of, you know, but it's just awfully convenient.
I didn't think about that. It was an inside job.
Yeah. Well. Hey, I'm not saying one thing one way or the other. I'm just encouraging our listeners to think about it.
You're just asking questions.
I am just asking questions. I also really liked here. I always appreciate when they do the Word From Us Kids classic of taking drawings that the kids have made and animating them. It's something they've been doing since the very beginning of Arthur, and I'm glad it hasn't been a lost art as we get much later into the show's production cycle. Supporting this podcast is how it keeps going, and it's very easy to do. So here's how you can do that. If you're listening to this show and want to get the full back catalog of Elwood City Limits and all of its sister shows and offshoots, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and even more services. You can also go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/Elwood City Limits, for the full back catalog. If we aren't on a service you use, please let us know. You can interact with us on social media. We're on Twitter @ECL Podcast, Instagram @Elwood City Limits, and twitch.tv/Elwood City Limits Pod for our occasional streams. We're also on Facebook and Tumblr. Feel free to reach out to us on social media, or you can email us, and your email might be read on the show, elwoodcitylimits@gmail.com. Finally, for exclusive content including entire side series like For the Kids, a PBS Kids podcast, and ECL Origins, subscribe to us for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Elwood City Limits. That's all for now. Thanks a lot for listening, and now back to the show.
And now, back to Arthur!
And then we go to this, the longest 11 minutes. This one I'm very interested to talk with you about. So, the cold open starts off with Arthur asking us a question: what would life be like without the important inventions of our time? So, maybe that's the wheel, or the printing press, or the telephone. We see this in various places. So, like, if the cavemen didn't invent the wheel, they might have been eaten by dinosaurs. There's a really, like, surprisingly funny thing here where Caveman Arthur and Caveman Buster are being chased by a dinosaur, and they get into a prehistoric car, and Arthur tries to run with it almost Flintstone style, but he doesn't have the hole in the bottom. And we see the shadow of the dinosaur go over them, and Caveman Arthur says, "This will not end well."
I wrote down some caveman humor, some classic getting caveman bits off.
With the printing press, we see, without the printing press, then we'd have to do a lot of different publications by hand. With the telephone, it was that Arthur runs all the way to Buster's to let him know that he's going to be late, and then runs away. So maybe what would life be like without other important inventions? And there's one important invention that we're going to hear a lot about in this one. We start off, the main group for this one is Arthur, Buster, Muffy, and LaDonna. They're all hanging out, doing parallel play on their laptops and phones in Arthur's living room. Let's go through each of them here. So first off, the one we see first, talk about a throwback here. Arthur playing some kind of virtual goose fighting game against somebody named Takashi.
Every compilation you've seen of some sort of Gen Alpha kind of watching a Minecraft or playing Minecraft while scrolling on TikTok. They're all doing kind of the lights are off. Is this nighttime? No, it's the middle of the day,
Middle
right?
of the day, yeah.
Yeah, it's the middle of the day. The blackout curtains are drawn. I wonder who this Takashi character was. Was there a Takashi in... Remember the Confuse the Goose online episode? Weren't they playing against some sort of shadowy
They were playing
person?
so Forehand 451, which was Emily and
I knew you'd have
Mary
that.
Ellen.
Oh, right. It was Mary Ellen. Forehand 451.
Where's Mary Ellen? That's a character I want to have come back. So yeah, now Virtual Goose has become some kind of fighting game, like Street Fighter style fighting game, which Evo just happened. LaDonna is watching baby bird videos on YooHooTube, which is the YouTube equivalent that we've seen before. Muffy is taking selfies with her phone, and Buster is researching aliens online. In fact, we see that the search engine that Buster is using is Boogle. We've had Poogles and Woogles, and now we've got Boogle. We're running out of consonants to put before Oogle.
Yeah, this is like anime tier, like WcDonald's or something.
But unfortunately, while everybody's in the middle of this, Lucas, when you know it, the internet cuts out. They lose the internet. Buster thinks that he was getting too close to the truth to finding out about aliens, and they shut down the internet. That you want to talk about inside jobs. That's what Buster is saying. And so the rest of this episode, the longest 11 minutes, refers to the kids existing without the internet. They try to fix the internet. Lucas, they do the unplug the router and then plug it back in, and that doesn't work. They see Alberto next door. His internet is also out. Dad doesn't know how to fix the internet. And this felt really weird to me at first, and I wasn't quite sure why, but I eventually figured it out. It's really weird for this show specifically that started broadcasting in the 90s to have the episode where the kids don't know what to do without the internet.
Right, because we've seen it's the exact same thing as Bart with a cell phone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When the show's lasted so long that you've seen the characters exist at the same age in another era, it's kind of incongruous. There's a dissonance with your memories of like, well, these kids used to not have the internet at all.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's specifically for a problem like us who have been watching so long. If you're a little kid watching it, and this is the first time you've seen it, it would make perfect sense because you're like, I have the internet.
Sure.
These guys would have the internet. Yeah. But yeah, this episode kind of descends into, it's nowhere near as good as the Blizzard, but it's similar to, in the Blizzard, they had to learn how to survive without power.
Yeah.
And in this one, they're trying to figure out how to survive without the internet. So kind of on the theme of what we've been talking about episodes kind of reinventing a previous theme. It's sort of the Blizzard, but for a new era.
Well, and I think you make a good point of this is obviously meant to reflect the modern reality for kids watching it in the end of the 2010s. So I get why it's being done, and you don't have to cater to the weird 30-year-olds that are yelling about your children's cartoon on a podcast. But with all the references being done to, like, Arthur, the ones for the people who were maybe watching in season 1 and now have kids of their own or something like that, it is really... Incongruous is a great word. I'm glad you used that. This plot has them act dumb to prove a point about kids' supposed reliance on the internet, but it does it in ways that like don't make sense to me. So, for example, the kids find a Polaroid camera and they don't know what it is. And immediately I was like, DW had a Polaroid camera in the first season. She used it in the sleepover episode.
So I'm glad you mentioned the Polaroid camera. So basically the kids... They start rummaging through old stuff in the attic. Mm-hmm. And then the episode kind of descends into a kids react video.
Yeah.
Remember those videos?
Yeah.
The Jack Brothers?
Yeah.
You hand a kid a Game Boy, they try touching the screen. What's this?
Yeah.
And, and those videos aren't for the pleasure of the kids. They're for the adults who know about that stuff to go, oh, I can't believe they don't know what a Game Boy is.
Yeah.
They don't know how a Polaroid camera works.
Exactly.
You're right though. She's got a Polaroid camera in the opening, like in the theme song. They take a picture, like classic. Well, that's not a Polaroid camera, but it's like an old time.
It's a camera with film in it, yeah.
And
the fact that they're just like, oh, what came out of it? Oh, what is this? And then they find out later, it's like, come on, guys.
It's a little bit grating because I don't even think a kid would enjoy this part because, again, it's for the adults to be like, oh, that's my era. I remember those. I don't know if a kid is interested in hearing how a Polaroid camera works. And also, like, do kids actually not know how a Polaroid camera works?
Like they're
maybe
still
if you're
selling
6.
Polaroid cameras now. Like, you can still buy one, and it's just, you can buy, like, a little printer for it. You can still get this, and they're making new ones. Like, but they also do stuff like they find a box full of encyclopedias, and the kids don't know what an encyclopedia is. Like, Buster's like, oh, it's like the book version of Wikipedia. And I'm like, it's just like, I know you know what this is, but in a much earlier year. And LaDonna has a line about like, books don't have screens that you can turn the brightness up on. I'm like, oh, for God's sake, come on. It's just so silly. It's very, very silly. DW is also hanging around, by the way. She was trying to get them to play with her. And so she's kind of tagging along as the internet is out. The only other thing that happens here is that Buster takes a picture on the Polaroid of a baby bird that has fallen from its nest. So the kids all work together to return it to its nest because they don't have access to Boogle, so they can't Boogle what the answer is. But LaDonna has an idea from the videos that she's watched before. By the way, I actually really like this line from Muffy when they find the Polaroid camera and they're taking a bunch of pictures with it, and there's a counter on it that shows you how many photos are left. And Muffy says, limited photos? How barbaric. Which is actually, like, that would be really hard to explain to a kid these days. But then Arthur has a terrible line where they realize they have to try to get the bird up to the nest. And Arthur says, it's like Best of the Nest, IRL.
This made me cringe. I was officially... And I don't often cringe at Arthur, Will. And that's not to say that I'm someone who doesn't cringe in my day-to-day. I'm cringing all the time. One might call me a cringe lord.
Sure.
But this Arthur very rarely makes me cringe. It's why I'm happy to talk about it day in, day out.
Yeah.
But no, this had me cringing. Especially the fact that you could say Best of the Nest IRL, but the fact that they weren't confident enough in just saying that, and then they had to explain what IRL stands for. Not good.
Yeah, they had to say in real life, just like, ugh. Do the kids know what you're talking about, or do they not? Like, who are you talking to here? So eventually, they create a new nest out of a strawberry basket, and the idea is to migrate the mama bird to this new one that has the baby in it, and they're successful, and they manage to put the nest back up in the tree, and everybody's fine. The internet comes back on, and it was only out for 11 minutes. Can you believe it? It felt like all day. And Arthur wraps up by saying, I don't know about you guys, but I wasn't worried. Even though he obviously, they were all sweating it. This also isn't helped, particularly with me. Recently, I had Amazon Prime for a month, and I was just scrolling around, and I found the Arthur episodes on there. So I watched a few of them with my wife, and we had a great old time. They were mostly episodes from season 2, and I watched Arthur's TV free week. And that's another example of, like, it was only a weekend, but a week, but going without TV for that long, and the whole joke of like, oh, it feels like it's taking forever. And so hearing it here, it's like, oh, the internet was only out for 11 minutes. I'm like, yeah. We've done this so many times before. The episode where DW has a timeout for 10 minutes. It's just like, okay. Well, we'll obviously talk about our feelings. That's the end of that episode. Let's go back to when Rivals Came to Roost. Lucas, what did you think about this one that had everything to do with Lakewood versus Mighty Mountain?
So Rivals Came to Roost. First of all, very funny episode. The worm thing, it's like the Family Guy jokes where they keep repeating it over and over again, and it becomes a little bit grating, but then it comes back around and becomes funny because you're just like, all the worm talk was starting to get me going. Buster's very funny in this episode. But the really interesting thing about this episode is it's similar to the episode where the school burns down, and it's a sort of a analogy for 9/11.
Yeah, April
episode
9th.
Yeah, exactly. This episode could be read as and it doesn't have to be so specific. It could be read about, why should you be accepting of the other, right? Why shouldn't you otherize someone? Now, the more specific reading would be that, and a listener kind of gestured toward this in their email. The Mighty Mountain is kind of an analogy for instance, like a refugee or an immigrant.
Sure.
And the thing that I thought was so kind of just smart and way beyond what kids TV is usually capable of is it's not just simply, you need to be welcoming to the other, and you need to not otherize people, and you need to be empathetic to other people and have compassion. But they actually add a layer of nuance in that it is straining on the school's resources. This additional presence is that they have to share the school, and in some ways it's difficult, and they have to share resources that they wouldn't have to otherwise. And that makes it a much more complicated conversation, because it's like, well, do we just want things to be better for us in the school like we used to have? Or are we going to have empathy and be accepting in the spirit of even though these kids are different from us, we understand that they're in a tougher situation and we need to be accommodating of that. And so I thought that was a really interesting element that this episode added, that it really didn't have to, because it's such a complicated, you might see a kid watch this episode and you see that they're eating the gross pasta and they're like, yeah, they should just kick out the Mighty Mountain kids. They were trying to get at their worms, and they're their long rivals. Why would they be accepting of them? And so it's a really kind of nuanced metaphor, because in some cases, especially I find this kind of rhetoric going around Canada these days. We are a country that welcomes quite a bit of immigration.
Yeah.
And some of the rhetoric you see is that, all this immigration and all these is going to make things harder for the people who already live here because it's a strain on the resources, right? That's the argument counter to immigration. And so I thought this episode does a really good job of not only kind of presenting why you should care about and again, this immigration analogy is just my read on it, but it could be seen as any kind of out group, right?
Yeah.
Why you should have compassion for the out group and not just the in group. And it even presents a counter argument to its own argument, which is just so far above, most shows aimed at 7-year-olds, right? Most shows would just be like, you got to be nice to other people, right? And so I was really, really impressed with when Rivals Came to Roost. I thought echoes of some of the great morals in Arthur history, something like a Grandpa Dave's Farm. It's not as good as that episode because we're in the Flash era and we got to look at, LaDonna and all this other stuff. But I thought for this kind of late era Arthur, I was really impressed how it tackled this kind of complicated situation.
You really put a lens to that I wasn't even thinking about, and now I like this episode even more. Like, I think you're totally right, and this is what Yoshi was getting at in the email. Yeah, I never took that reading with it. That's really interesting. I liked it just on its, for what I was saying on the surface. I didn't even think to look further for it, but you absolutely can, and I'm glad that you did. Yeah, I liked this episode quite a bit. I think that there was always a lot of interesting hay to be made with the rivalry between Lakewood and Mighty Mountain, and they have been doing that a little bit, like Francine and the Soccer Spy, but this one made it a lot more explicit, and we do actually know a couple of students there now. So this was, I thought, a very good message that was couched in a fun episode, and yeah, this is something that you could think even deeper about, and I really like the lens that you applied to it, Lucas, the ways of thinking about how this can apply to something like immigration, and it's not necessarily, it's Arthur, so it's not necessarily going for that, but as you say, Arthur is at its best when it's applicable to something like this, and yeah, that raises it in my estimation. So yeah, I'm really glad. This is one of the many times I'm glad that you speak on this before me, because I would have been positive about this. I don't know if I would have been this positive about it if I hadn't heard from you first. And, I mean, I don't know if this will influence you necessarily, and I don't even know if we disagree with this, but longest 11 minutes, didn't like it. Like, I don't hate it or anything. It's not a terrible episode. And I will also admit, once again, some of my problems with this episode have to do with the fact that I am not in the target age group for this, And I am bringing a lot of baggage into viewing this episode, baggage being that I've seen all of Arthur before this, that is not necessarily intended. So I'll just be putting that out there. That's the context that my feelings reside in. But this was eye-rolling in places. And I just think that similar to when Rivals Came to Roost, I think there is a better way that Arthur could have gone about these kids be on their phone, you know? And I'm not saying that you can't talk about that kind of issue, and certainly you should, because technology access is way different for kids these days than when you and I were younger. So like you mentioned, Lucas, back in the older episodes, they didn't really have access to the internet. They had computer access, but the internet didn't come around until quite a bit later. And it was just, so we talked about like TV addiction and stuff like that. It was way different. But I just think that it makes a lot of the characters look a little dumb, in the sense of like the Arthur kids are not the ones I think of as always being on their phones or on technology. They are tapped in, but generally they're also kids who like to play outside. They like to read. They like to hang out with each other and go places. So it just felt weird to cram them into like these kids who don't know what a book is, or what an encyclopedia is, or what a camera is. I don't know. Like, this felt a little bit too PSA-ish to me, and I didn't really enjoy it.
Longest 11 minutes, aptly named episode. I agree, Will. I think you hit the nail on the head with it's eye-rolling. You know, the worst thing an Arthur episode could be is boring.
Yeah.
And this episode was not boring, and it actually is kind of funny in parts.
Yeah, sure.
There's lines that made me laugh. You know, talking about... They turn on public radio, and the first thing they hear is someone talking about a best-selling book about 100 new uses for spatulas. That's funny.
Yeah.
But you're totally right in that it's really annoying as far as Arthur episodes are. It's our worst, probably our worst example yet on Arthur of those kids be on their phone. And you're right that it just rings totally hollow. Especially, you know, we're sticklers. We don't want to sound like the guy from The Simpsons saying, "I hope they got fired for that blunder." But especially when we've seen these characters, you know, utilize some of these antiquated technologies, they're like, "I don't know what is this? It's broken." You know, I think the kids watching this knows how to use this stuff. I think the parents know how to use this stuff, so it ends up being for nobody. It's just kind of insulting to one's intelligence. And earlier I compared it to the Blizzard, and that's kind of what I was saying it was gesturing towards, even though the Blizzard's more about kind of coming together as a community rather than just getting by without electricity. But I didn't mean that as a compliment, because the Blizzard's, you know, probably my favorite episode of Arthur of all time, and this is far from it. I agree that pretty bad episode, all things considered. And after the really fantastic When Rivals Come to Roost, the longest 11 minutes, it earned its namesake.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's funny how in our discussion of later era Arthur, we are able to draw on a lot of episodes that we remember from the past. And, you know, it's one thing when they want to remix the story with different characters. It's another thing when it's just like, you did this, but it was better here. Or like this story element or something. So, yeah, I don't know. So, season 22 giveth and taketh away. Like, we're already seeing... high highs and low lows, so they're maximizing their minutes in terms of stuff that's interesting to talk about here on the podcast. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us for this episode of Elwood City Limits. Really appreciate you being here. We're halfway through season 22. We've got 2 more episodes after this one, but don't forget, here on Elwood City Limits we also have a monthly Patreon podcast, and this month it's going to be ECL Origins. Now, I don't mind telling you, we're into August now, and at the end of the month, it's my birthday. But I want to give you a gift, Lucas. I want to do something for you, because with the time we have left, you've communicated something to me about what you want to cover on ECL Origins, and I think it's high time. So, and I will say also, this show that I'm referring to, I have a little bit of history with it myself. So I'm interested to hear about it from your perspective and to revisit it, because I'm familiar with the manga, but not the anime. So, Lucas, we're going to talk about Naruto.
That's right. We're gonna do our sexy no jitsu. I can't wait, Will. And when you think about ECL Origins, which by the way you have to subscribe to the Patreon to listen to, it's really about revisiting the shows of our childhood, the shows that got us into animation. And for me personally, there's probably no more important show besides perhaps SpongeBob than Naruto in terms of my animation journey. So can't wait to talk about it.
So that'll be coming up around the end of August. Not the exact end. I'm actually going to be taking the last week of August off for my birthday week. But we will be getting that to you by the end of the month. And yeah, I'm really interested to talk about Naruto and our histories with it and just watch an episode and see what we like about it. Then, coming up on the next episode of Elwood City Limits, we're going to be talking about Muffy's house guests and Binky can't always get what he wants. Are we going to continue to split the difference between great episodes and terrible episodes? I mean, not that the feud was terrible, but one great and one not so great. Or will we find a middle ground? We've only got 2 more episodes to work with, 4 more stories, so season 22 better step it up. If you're enjoying the Olympics, please continue to do so. Keep staying cool here in the summer, and we will catch you next time on Elwood City Limits, and that's it for this episode. My name's Will Young, and for Lucas Mancini,
I can't escape the worms!
We'll see you next time.